My question is, why do you need compost? To me, it seems like a hell of a lot of work I mean, people do this, ready? They take the plants out of the garden, they pull plants out of the garden. Have you seen this? You take your tomato plants, and they take them and put them in a pile, and they build a big pile, and then they turn the pile a couple times, and they take everything and put it right back out in the garden. Like, why don't you just let them be there in the garden, and they'll fall down, and they'll break down. To me, that seems, I mean, whatever. I don't want to be obnoxious, but I think the history of organic farming, and I come from this background of farming, of organic, is maybe limestone for pH and compost is all you need. And that was because Godel was, out there writing books in the 40s and 50s, and he was a good entrepreneur and got a lot of books out there, and everybody read those books and figured that was the truth. Right? I mean, there's other people out there who are doing good work, finding out other pieces of the puzzle. Albrecht was also functioning in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and identifying the critical roles of different elements. He didn't have a publishing arm that was getting that information out there. So I had a guy come out to maybe work on my farm next year from California, where the farm he works on, they use, it's like 60 tons of compost per acre per year. Well, that's a lot of compost. And he's like, you don't use compost? Like, how do you grow crops? I'm like, well, I put them in the ground. They grow. So I don't think you need compost. I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing per se. I think it oftentimes can be used to excess. What do you need the compost? What do you need the compost for? People talk about NP and K, right? Nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. So potassium, most of the soil. I mean, the soil has a lot of potassium in it. There's a lot of inherent potassium already in the soil, tens of tons in the top 6 inches of any acre. It's a question of availability of that potassium. One of the best ways to lock up potassium is to let your soil dry out. As soon as the soil dries out, the potassium becomes unavailable, and it takes a good 6 weeks to 2 months after you rehydrate that soil for the potassium to become available again. Phosphorus is definitely an issue. We oftentimes don't have sufficient levels of phosphorus, background levels in our soil, and phosphorus is oftentimes very poorly available. And there is a family of fungi called mycorrhizae, which are very sophisticated at solubilizing phosphorus and feeding it to plants. So I'm not so much concerned about compost as a phosphorus source if I feel like I've got a good fungal establishment in my soil. I use rock phosphate to build up the underlying levels of phosphorus. If you've got animal manure, that's fine. You can use that also. I'm not worried about phosphorus from compost. And the final one is nitrogen, which people talk about. And I don't use nitrogen on my farm. I believe that if I need to use nitrogen, I'm a bad farmer. I look at the forest and I ask anybody who wants to talk, who is putting how much nitrogen fertilizer out in that forest? Right. I don't see any nitrogen fertilizer being applied to that forest, and plants seem to grow just fine. My understanding is that 2/3 of every breath of air you breathe is nitrogen. Right? Every breath of air you breathe is got more nitrogen in it than anything else. We are surrounded in a sea of nitrogen. Nature has figured out ways to get that nitrogen out of the air and into the plant, into the soil, that don't involve fertilizer, don't involve bringing something in and adding it. They do involve a functioning microbiological community. You need to have the enzymes, you need to have the bacteria, the fungi who have that faculty. There's a book over here called Soil Microorganisms and Higher Plants. This is just a reprint of the work of a Russian researcher called Krasilnikov, who, by the time I was born in the 1970s, had identified 2,000 species of nitrogen fixers. Not just working with legumes, not just working with beans and peas, but working with every single species of plant. Every single species of plant has evolved the capacity to work with nitrogen fixers to access nitrogen from the environment. They don't all nodulate like the legumes do, but they all can fix nitrogen functionally by feeding their symbiotes And that's why you need molybdenum, as far as I'm concerned, in your soil test, is because molybdenum is at the center of the nitrogenase enzyme. So you need not only have the microbiology, but you also need to have the elements for the plant to be able to do that. But if you do have the microbiology, if you have inoculated, and you do have the elements present, you should not need to add nitrogen. So that's the story I tell myself about why I don't need compost. And I seem to be at least somewhat successful doing it. I don't believe one should need to add these things, soluble nutrients, anything with a number on a bag. I don't think is necessary. If you're managing your soil well, you shouldn't need it.